You've probably noticed that far-right movements are on the rise all over the world. Now, most of the time the conversation revolves around politics and economics. But what if the real story, the one that explains its powerful pull, is actually happening inside our own minds? In this explainer, we're going to peel back that curtain and look at the core psychological drivers, the needs, the fears, the mental shortcuts that can make these ideologies so compelling, all based on recent research. So here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll break it down into 4 main parts. First, we'll start by asking the central psychological question. Then, we'll dig into the foundational personality traits that can make someone more receptive. After that, we'll look at the emotional catalyst, the spark that really ignites action. And finally, we'll explore the cognitive fortress that shields these beliefs from doubt. Okay, let's dive right in. The best way to really get a handle on this is to frame our whole discussion around one single central question. And this is the question at the heart of it all. We're deliberately stepping away from the usual headlines and policy debates to ask something a bit more fundamental. What's going on psychologically? What needs, what fears, what mental biases are being tapped into here? We're not just looking at what people believe. We're trying to understand how they've come to believe it. So let's build this from the ground up, starting with the psychological foundation. It turns out that long before a political speech is ever heard, certain underlying personality traits can actually make a person more open to this kind of worldview. Let's take a look at what they are. You know, when you comb through the research, 2 major psychological predictors pop up again and again. And seeing them side by side like this is pretty revealing, because they're different, but they work together. On one hand, you have right-wing authoritarianism, or RWA for short. And on the other, you have the need for cognitive closure, or NCC. Let's break down exactly what those mean. Okay, so first up, we've got RWA. Now, this is more than just being politically conservative. It's a really specific personality profile that's built on 3 pillars. 1, a deep-seated respect for strong authority figures. 2, a kind of defensive aggression towards anyone considered an outsider. And 3, a powerful desire to stick to traditional social conventions. You can think of it as a psychological craving for a world that's orderly, predictable, and simple. And then there's the second piece of this puzzle, the need for cognitive closure. Here's a way to think about it. Have you ever had a really complex, messy problem and you just wanted someone to give you a simple yes or no answer right now? Well, that feeling is NCC. It's a deep-seated preference for certainty over ambiguity, for quick, firm answers over complicated, messy truths. And here is where it all clicks together. When you combine those 2 traits, that desire for a rigid, orderly world from RWA, and that intense discomfort with uncertainty from NCC, you get a psychological profile that is basically tailor-made for any ideology that promises one thing above all else: stability and clarity in what feels like a very chaotic world. But wait, there's actually one more layer to this foundation. It's a motivational drive that researchers call social dominance orientation, or SDO. Now, this isn't just about wanting order. This is an active desire for a society that's, well, built like a ladder, a clear hierarchy, and it comes with the belief that one's own group, the in-group, is naturally superior and deserves to be at the top. And you can see this pop up in some really specific ways. SDO is often the engine behind prejudice against outsiders, things like xenophobia and nativism. It also fuels the idea that social inequality isn't some problem that needs to be fixed, but is actually the natural, and even the right, way for society to be structured. All right, so we've laid the foundation. We have these underlying traits. But you know what? A person can have these traits, and they can just lie there, dormant. To really activate them, you need a spark. You need a catalyst. And more often than not, that catalyst is a very powerful and very specific emotion. Now, your first instinct might be to think, oh, it's all about fear and anxiety, right? But the research points somewhere else. Just think about it for a second. When you're anxious, you tend to pull back to avoid threats. But anger does the opposite. It's what psychologists call an approach emotion. It doesn't make you want to hide. It makes you want to move towards the threat and confront it. And this is where the political messaging gets really, really clever. It takes all those vague, floating anxieties that people have, worries about their job, their culture, their place in the world, and it performs a kind of psychological alchemy. It transforms that shapeless anxiety into focused, targeted, action-oriented anger. And of course, that anger needs a target.
This whole process has a name, and it's a classic from the psychological playbook, scapegoating. It follows a pretty predictable four-step plan. Step 1, you start without widespread anxiety. Step 2, you channel it into sharp, focused anger. Step 3, you point that anger at a simple, easy-to-identify target. And the final, crucial step, step 4, you dehumanize that target. That makes it psychologically okay for people to justify aggression.
This quote here really gets to the heart of it. Dehumanization is so effective because it basically flips a switch on our natural empathy. Once you start seeing a group as less than human, it creates a kind of moral blind spot. It's like being handed a psychological permission slip to act on your anger without feeling guilty about it.
And this is where things get really weird, almost paradoxical. This anger is often supercharged by convincing the dominant group that they are the real victims. How does that work? Well, the rhetoric takes any social progress made by minority groups and completely reframes it. It's no longer a move toward equality. Instead, it's painted as a direct threat to the majority's status, their culture, their very identity. For some, losing even a little bit of relative advantage can feel like being persecuted, and that feeling creates a whole lot of resentment. Okay, so you've got the foundation and you've got the emotional spark. But how do you protect this new worldview from, reality, from counterarguments, from facts? Well, that's where the final piece comes in. The cognitive fortress. A powerful psychological shield of belief. This fortress is built using a couple of mental shortcuts that, honestly, we all use to some extent. The first is confirmation bias, that little voice in our head that pushes us to seek out information that proves we're right and to ignore anything that suggests we might be wrong. The second is something called motivated reasoning. This is when our goal isn't to find the objective truth, it's to defend our team, our identity. We basically start with the answer we want and then work backward to find reasons to believe it. Now, a huge part of defending this fortress is to attack anyone who might have a map to get through the walls. This is where anti-intellectualism becomes a key tactic. By labeling experts, academics, and journalists as some kind of corrupt elite, the ideology can discredit any outside information that might challenge the narrative. It's a way of saying that your common sense is more trustworthy than their complicated evidence, which effectively builds an information bubble around followers. Okay, quick question for you. Right now, without looking it up, could you explain step by step in detail how asylum laws actually work? I mean, it's a pretty complex topic, right? Look, if you struggled with that, you're not alone. It's a perfect example of a cognitive bias we all have called the illusion of explanatory depth. Basically, we often feel like we understand things way better than we actually do. Inside this ideological fortress, when someone's superficial knowledge gets challenged, their confidence can collapse. And when that happens, they often fall back on the simple, emotionally charged slogans that the movement provides. So let's step back and look at the whole picture. Because what we have here is a really powerful, self-reinforcing psychological cycle. It all starts with uncertainty and anxiety, which triggers a deep need for order. That need is then fulfilled by a rigid authoritarian ideology. That ideology then channels anger through scapegoating, and the whole worldview is protected by cognitive biases that filter out inconvenient facts, which, of course, just reinforces the original feeling that the world is a chaotic and threatening place. The loop feeds itself. So I want to leave you with one final question to think about. Now that you can see this psychological machinery working under the surface, that need for order, that conversion of anxiety into anger, that fortress of belief, how does that change the way you hear the political rhetoric all around you? The next time you listen to a speech or see a headline, what are you going to be listening for now that you maybe weren't listening for before?